Essays in Idleness by Kanko. Essays 26 through 50. 26. When I recall the months and years I spent as the intimate of someone whose affections have now faded like cherry blossoms scattering even before a wind blew, I still remember every word of hers that once so moved me. And when I realize that she, as happens in such cases, is steadily slipping away from my world, I feel a sadness greater even than that of separation from the dead. That is why, I am sure, a man once grieved that white thread should be dyed in different colors, and why another lamented that roads inevitably fork. Among the 100 verses presented to the retired Emperor Horikawa, one runs, "The fence round her house, the woman I loved long ago, is ravaged and fallen. Only violets remain, mingled with the spring weeds." What a lonely picture. The poem must describe something that really occurred. 27. The moment during the ceremony of abdication of the throne when the sword, jewels, and mirror are offered to the new emperor is heartbreaking in the extreme. When the newly retired emperor abdicated in the spring of 1318, he wrote this poem, I understand. Quote, "Even menials of the palace staff treat me as a stranger now. In my unswept garden lie the scattered cherry blossoms." Unquote. What a lonely feeling the poem seems to convey. People are too distracted by all the festivities of the new reign for anyone to wait on the retired emperor. This is precisely the kind of occasion when a man's true feelings are apt to be revealed. 28. Nothing is more saddening than the year of imperial mourning. The very appearance of the temporary palace is forbidding. The wooden floor built close to the ground, the crudely fashioned reed blinds, the coarse gray cloth hung above the blinds, the utensils of rough workmanship, and the attendants all wearing strangely drab costumes, sword scabbards, and sword knots. 29. When I sit down in quiet meditation, the one emotion hardest to fight against is a longing in all things for the past. After the others have gone to bed, I pass the time on a long autumn's night by putting in order whatever belongings are at hand. As I tear up scraps of old correspondence I should prefer not to leave behind, I sometimes find among them samples of the calligraphy of a friend who has died, or pictures he drew for his own amusement, and I feel exactly as I did at the time. Even with letters written by friends who are still alive, I try, when it has been long since we met, to remember the circumstances, the year. What a moving experience that is. It is sad to think that a man's familiar possessions, indifferent to his death, should remain unaltered long after he is gone. 30. Nothing is sadder than the time after a death. During the 49 days of mourning, the family, having moved to a temple in the mountains or some such place, foregathers in large numbers in inconvenient, cramped quarters, and frantically occupies itself with the motions of mourning for the dead. The days pass unbelievably fast. On the final day, all civility is gone. No one has a word for anybody else, and each man, with airs of knowing exactly what is to be done, sets about packing his belongings, and then all go about their separate ways. Once they have returned home, many sad remembrances are sure to afflict them anew. Sometimes I hear people say on such occasions, "It's bad luck to mention such and such a thing. You should avoid it for the family's sake." How can people worry about such things in the midst of so great a tragedy? The insensitivity of people still appalls me. We do not by any means forget the dead, even after months and years have gone by, but, as they say, the departed one grows more distant each day. We may deny it, but no doubt, because our sorrow is not as sharp as at the time, we talk about foolish things, we smile. The body is interred in some lonely mountain and visited only at the required times. Before long, the grave markers covered with moss and buried in fallen leaves. The evening storms and the night moon become the only regular mourners. As long as people remember the deceased person and miss him, all is still well. But before long, those people too disappear, and the descendants, who know the man only from reports, are hardly likely to feel deep emotion. Once the services honoring the dead man cease, nobody knows who he was or even his name. Only the sight of the spring weeds sprouting each year by his grave will stir the emotions of sensitive people. But in the end, even the pine tree that groaned in the storm winds is broken into firewood before it reaches its allotted 1,000 years, and the old grave is plowed up and turned into rice land. How sad it is that even the last memento of the dead should vanish. 31. One morning after a pleasant fall of snow, I sent a letter to someone with whom I had business, but failed to mention the snow. The reply was amusing. Do you suppose that I shall take any notice of what someone says who is so perverse that he writes a letter without a word of inquiry about how I am enjoying the snow? I am most disappointed in you. Now that the author of that letter is dead, even so trivial an incident sticks in my mind. 32. About the 20th of the 9th month, at the invitation of a certain gentleman, I spent the night wandering with him, viewing the moon. He happened to remember a house we passed on the way, and having himself announced, went inside. In a corner of the overgrown garden, heavy with dew, I caught the faint scent of some perfume which seemed quite accidental. This suggestion of someone living in retirement from the world moved me deeply. In due time, the gentleman emerged, but I was still under the spell of the place. As I gazed for a while at the scene from the shadows, someone pushed the double doors open a crack wider, evidently to look at the moon. It would have been most disappointing if she had bolted the doors as soon as he had gone. How was she to know that someone lingering behind would see her? Such a gesture could have only been the product of inborn sensitivity. I heard that she died not long afterwards. 33. When construction of the present palace had been completed, the buildings were inspected by experts on court usage, who pronounced them free of faults everywhere. The day for the emperor to move to the new palace was already near when the Abbess Genki examined it and declared, the bell-shaped windows in the Khanin palace were rounder and without frames. This was an impressive feat of memory. The windows in the new palace, peaked at the top, had wooden borders. This mistake was later corrected. 34. The kaiko is the lid of a shell resembling the conch, but smaller and with a long and narrow projection at the mouth. I found some at the Bay of Kanazawa in Musashi province. The people of the place call it hanatari. 35. A person with bad handwriting should not be embarrassed to write his own letters. There is something irritating about people who, pleading their writing is ugly, ask others to write for them. 36. Someone once told me this story. I had failed to visit a certain lady for a long time, and being aware of my negligence, I could imagine how annoyed she must be with me. I felt there was nothing I could say by way of apology. Just at this time, a most unexpected and welcome message came from the lady asking, "Have you a workman you can spare?" That is the kind of disposition I admire in a woman. I was struck by the aptness of his remark. 37. When a person who has always been extremely close appears on a particular occasion reserved and formal towards you, some people undoubtedly will say, "Why act that way now, after all these years?" But I feel that such behavior shows sincerity and breeding. On the other hand, I am sure I should feel equally attracted if someone with whom I am on distant terms should choose on some occasion to speak to me with utter frankness. 38. What a foolish thing it is to be governed by a desire for fame and profit, and to fret away one's whole life without a moment of peace. Great wealth is no guarantee of security. Wealth, in fact, tends to attract calamities and disaster. Even if, after you die, you leave enough gold to prop up the North Star, it will only prove a nuisance to your heirs. The pleasures that delight the foolish man are likewise meaningless to the man of discrimination, who considers a big carriage, sleek horses, gold, and jeweled ornaments all equally undesirable and senseless. You had best throw away your gold in the mountains and drop your jewels into a ravine. It is an exceedingly stupid man who will torment himself for the sake of worldly gain. To leave behind a reputation that will not perish through long ages to come is certainly to be desired, but can one say that men of high rank and position are necessarily superior? There are foolish and incompetent men who, having been born into illustrious families, and being favored by the times, rise to exalted position and indulge themselves in the extremes of luxury. There are also many learned and good men who by their own choice remain in humble positions and end their days without ever having encountered good fortune. A feverish craving for high rank and position is second in foolishness only to seeking wealth. One would like to leave behind a glorious reputation for surpassing wisdom and character, but careful reflection will show that what we mean by love of a glorious reputation is delight in the approbation of others. Neither those who praise nor those who abuse last for long, and the people who have heard their reports are likely to depart the world just as quickly. Before whom, then, should we feel ashamed? By whom should we wish to be appreciated? Fame, moreover, inspires backbiting. It does no good whatsoever to have one's name survive. The craving after fame is next most foolish. If I were to address myself to those who nevertheless seek desperately to attain knowledge and wisdom, I would say that knowledge leads to deceit, and artistic talent is the product of much suffering. True knowledge is not what one hears from others or acquires through study. What then are we to call knowledge? Proper and improper come to one and the same thing. Can we call anything good? The truly enlightened man has no learning, no virtue, no accomplishments, no fame. Who knows of him? Who will report his glory? It is not that he conceals his virtue or pretends to be stupid. It is because from the outset he is above distinctions between wise and foolish, between profit and loss. If, in your delusion, you seek fame and profit, the results will be as I have described. All is unreality. Nothing is worth discussing, worth desiring. 39. A certain man once asked the high priest Honen, "Sometimes as I am saying the Nembutsu, I am seized by drowsiness and I neglect my devotions. How can I overcome this obstacle?" Honen replied, "Say the Nembutsu as long as you are awake." This was a most inspiring answer. Again he said, "If you are certain you will go to heaven, you certainly will. If you are uncertain, it is uncertain." This too was a sage remark. Again he said, "Even if you have doubts, you will go to heaven provided you say the Nembutsu." This too was a holy utterance. The Nembutsu is a prayer said by Jodo Buddhists who believe that salvation may be obtained by calling on Amida Buddha. 40. The daughter of a certain lay priest in the province of Inaba was reputed to be very beautiful, and many suitors asked for her hand. But this girl ate nothing but chestnuts and refused to touch rice or other grains. Her father therefore declined the men's proposals, saying, "Such a peculiar person is not fit to be married." 41. On the 5th day of the 5th month, I went to see the horse race at the Keimo shrine. There was such a mob before our carriage, between us and the view, that we could see nothing. We all got out of the carriage and pushed towards the railing, but the crowd was particularly dense in that area, and there seemed no chance of making our way to the fore. Just then we noticed a peach perched in the crotch of perched in the crotch of an ochi tree across the way, watching the race. Even as he clung to the tree, he was nodding drowsily, again and again, waking himself just as he seemed about to fall. People, observing the priest, laughed at his folly. What an idiot! Imagine anyone being able to sleep so peacefully when he's sitting on such a dangerous branch. It suddenly occurred to me, however, the hour of death may be upon us at any moment. To spend our days in pleasure-seeking, forgetful of this truth, is even more foolish. I blurted out the words, and some people standing before me said, "That's certainly true. It is a most stupid way to behave." Turning round towards us, they said, "Please come through here," and made room, urging us to take their places. Anybody at all might have made the same observation, but probably it came as a surprise at that particular moment and struck home. Man, not being made of wood or stone, is at times not without emotional reactions. 42. The monk called Abbot Yoga, the son of the Karahashi middle commander, was a teacher of religious doctrine. He suffered from dizzy spells, and gradually, as he advanced in years, his nose stopped up and he had difficulty in breathing. He underwent all kinds of treatment, but his ailment grew only the worse. His eyes, brows, and forehead swelled horribly and bulged out so much he could not even see. At first his face looked rather like a Ninomai mask, but eventually it became quite terrifying, like the devil's face. His eyes were stuck to the top of his head. What had been his forehead had become his nose, and so on. After this, he no longer showed himself even before the other priests of the temple, but remained in complete seclusion. Many years went by in this fashion, but finally his condition grew even worse, and he died. Such sicknesses actually exist. 43. Towards the end of spring, on a lovely mild day, I strolled by a stately-looking mansion set on a large property with ancient trees. A cherry tree was shedding blossoms in the garden. It was impossible to pass without stopping, and I went in. The shutters on the south side were all lowered, and the place looked deserted, but I could see them through an opening in the bamboo blinds over double doors that faced east and had been left attractively ajar. A handsome young man of about 20, at his ease but maintaining an elegant composure. He was reading a book he held open before him on a desk. I wonder who he was. I should like to visit him and ask. 44. A very young man, attired with great distinction in a glittering tunic, I could not make out the coloring in the moonlight, in trousers of a dark purple, stepped from the roughly made door of woven bamboo, and accompanied by a small boy, made his way along a path through rice fields that stretched into the distance. Drenched though he was by dew from the leaves of rice plants, he amused himself as he went along by playing a flute with consummate skill. I was curious to know where he might be headed, thinking it unlikely anyone here could appreciate such playing, and followed him. Presently the man stopped playing his flute, and as he reached the foot of the hill, entered a mansion with an imposing gate. I could see a carriage with its shafts resting on a stand in the courtyard, looking far more conspicuous than it would have in the capital. I asked a servant why it was there, and he replied, "A certain prince is residing here now. I imagine there is to be a Buddhist service." Priests who had assembled at the family chapel. A penetrating fragrance of incense wafted toward me in the cold night air, and ladies waiting traversed in the corridor leading from the residence to the chapel, leaving in their wake a fragrance of perfumed robes. Such attention to elegance of person was surprising in a mountain village, where none would see them. The garden, like an autumn field left to grow wild, was buried in dew, so heavy it spilled from the plants. The cries of the insects had a plaintive note. A garden stream murmured gently. The clouds passing to and fro seemed to move more quickly than in the capital, and the moon, never long the same, was clear and clouded by turns. 45. Kinyo, an officer of the second rank, had a brother called the High Priest Ryogaku, an extremely bad-tempered man. Next to his monastery grew a large nettle tree, which occasioned the nickname people gave him, the Nettle Tree High Priest. "That name is outrageous," said the high priest, and cut down the tree. The stump still being left, people referred to him now as the Stump High Priest. More furious than ever, Ryugaku had the stump dug up and thrown away. But this left a big ditch. People now called him the Ditch High Priest. 46. The priest known as the Burglar Bishop lived near Yanagara. His frequent encounters with burglars gave him the name, I understand. 47. A certain man on his way to Kayomitsu was joined on the road by an aged nun. As they trudged along, she kept murmuring, "Kusame, kusame," until finally he asked her, "Sister, why do you say that?" Without even deigning to answer, she kept up an unbroken stream of repetitions of the word. He persisted, and when she had been asked several times, she at last became angry and said, "What a nuisance of a man! Don't you know that unless you say the magic word when somebody sneezes, he'll die? The young master I've brought up as an acolyte now on Mount Hiei. He may be sneezing at this very moment for all I know. That's why I said kusame." This was certainly a case of unusual devotion. 48. When Lord Mitsuchika was serving as supervisor of the lectures on the Sutra of the Golden Light in the palace of the cloistered emperor, he was summoned before His Majesty, who offered food from his own tray and invited Mitsuchika to eat. When Mitsuchika had hastily finished the meal, he pushed the stand behind the imperial screen of state and took his leave. The ladies in waiting cried out to each other, "Oh, how dirty! Does he expect us to clean up his mess?" But the cloistered emperor exclaimed in great admiration, "That is how a man familiar with precedent behaves. I am most impressed." Note: the word tore is here interpreted as meaning clean up, but some scholars take it to mean eat. That is, does he expect us to eat his leftovers? 49. You must not wait until you are old before you begin practicing the way. Most of the gravestones from the past belong to men who died young. A man sometimes learns for the first time how mistaken his way of life has been only when he unexpectedly falls ill and is about to depart this world. His mistake lay in doing slowly what should have been done quickly, and in hastening to do what might best have been delayed. He regrets these actions committed in the past, but what good can it do, even if he feels regret at that stage? A man should bear firmly in mind that death is always threatening, and never for an instant forget it. If he does this, why should the impurities bred in him by the world not grow lighter, and his heart not develop an earnest resolve to cultivate the way of the Buddha? The story is told in Zenrin's 10 Courses of Salvation, of a holy man of long ago, who, when someone came to discuss important business concerning them both, answered, "An extremely urgent matter has come up, and it must be settled by morning, if not tonight." So he covered his ears, recited the Nembutsu, and presently achieved Buddhahood. A holy man named Shinkai was so aware of the impermanence of the world that he never even sat down and relaxed, but always remained crouching. 50. Along about the Ocho era, there was a rumor that a man from Ise had brought to the capital a woman who had become a demon, and for 20 days or more, people of the downtown and Shirakawa areas wandered here and there, day after day, hoping to look at the demon. They passed the word to one another. Yesterday she visited Sainoji. Today she's sure to go to the cloistered emperor's palace. At the moment she's at such and such place. Nobody actually claimed to have seen the demon, but no one for that matter said the report was untrue. People of all classes gossiped continuously about one subject, the demon, that and nothing else. One day, as I was on my way from Higiyashima to the area around Agui, I saw a crowd of people running from Shijo and above, all headed north. They were all shouting that the demon had been seen at the corner of Ichojo and Muromachi. I looked off in the direction from where I was, near Imedagawa. There was such a crowd packed around the cloistered emperor's reviewing stand that it seemed quite impossible to get through. I thought it unlikely the rumor could be completely groundless, and sent a man to investigate, but he could find nobody who had actually met the demon. The crowd continued to clamor in this manner until it grew dark. Finally, quarrels broke out and a number of unpleasant incidences occurred. For some time afterward, whenever anyone took sick for a few days, people tended to say that the false rumors about the demon had been a portent of the illness.